Okay, so we'll start by setting our motivation. So just take a minute, and as you listen to Shakyamuni Buddha's mantra, just allow that to remind you of your own potential, to encourage its awakening. Tai Tai Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha. Tai Tai Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha. Tai Tai Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha. Okay, hi everybody. We're going to start on page 45. So if you want to turn to page 45 in your main semester text. Okay, so we're going to start talking about this relationship between awakening our Buddha nature and developing our Buddha nature, and the relationship with the guru. Not the regular teacher, not the Sangha, but the guru, capital T teacher. What is all of this about in Buddhism, and why is it so important for awakening Buddha potential? So we're going to start going into that material. We're just going to talk about it really generally today, and then after the break, we'll go into some more depth. But if you want to make a note that during the break, if you could read pages 45 to 48. 45 to 48, it's quite short, but if you want to just kind of sit with it, it's by Dr. Alex Berzin, and it's from his really important seminal text, Wise Teacher, Wise Student, which for anyone who is considering any kind of guru-disciple relationship, really, really read it. It's really important, and he wrote it quite a few years ago, but it's very current and contemporary to issues today. So it's an important text. We'll just go ahead and read the first little section of it just to kind of get oriented. But before I get into any new material, did you want to ask anything or bring up anything from our 5 Buddha families conversations, either from Sutra perspective or Tantra perspective? Yeah, what did you think of the whole premise of the 5 Buddha families in both Sutra and Tantra perspectives? Is it in any way useful for framing your interactions with others, your relationship to yourself, or, I don't know, tell me a little bit about how you felt about those topics so I can know what was useful and what wasn't, and how it landed. Yeah.
I find the concept of the energy of angry very useful for some patients, because to me, because I saw, when I think about it as an energy, so it doesn't go to right or wrong. It's go to, I put it back in the neutral way, and because an energy is neutral, and it helped me look to follow to follow the energy. And I saw that the energy changed. If in my mind, I leave it as something neutral and that can be useful or can be harmful. And when I keep it in my mind, it helps me to see more clear the تاريخ, the processes, and it changes. When I keep it in my mind that it's an energy, and we have to help it to go to the right way. It's helpful. It's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Good. It sounds like you're approaching it the right way. Do you start to see kind of why there's all of this, I don't know, a little bit of like secrecy and separateness with the tantric conversation from the sutra conversation? Because if you weren't already oriented with the importance of ethics and you met this teaching, you could go kind of weird with it, right? You could say, oh, it's all neutral, energy is neutral, it goes this way or that way, but it's all fine, it's all good. And you could make it too simplistic and start to separate from ethics, because everything is empty of inherent existence, and you could go the wrong way with your understanding of emptiness, and you could go the wrong way with your understanding of energy. So you can sort of start to see one of the many reasons why Tantra is kind of taught separately and exclusively from the sutra path, because it's so easily misunderstood. You know, you could see that this particular teaching, if you met it without the right background, you could divorce it from ethics very easily and justify any number of things. Do you know what I mean? So for you guys, it's not so much of a danger because you're already in conversation about what helps and harms, and you already have a strong system of ethics as as an analyst and as a person. But for someone who hadn't really clarified their own morality, it could be quite a dangerous conversation. They'd like the idea of it, it would feel very freeing and refreshing, but then they could use it as an excuse to really be quite destructive. So we're going to go on to this relation between the spiritual mentor and Buddha nature. So top of page 45. Alexander Berzin is referring to the Gampopa text that we've been looking at, the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, which was where more of our technical teachings were at, where the whole conversation of disposition from the sutra perspective was at. So he's referring to that same text, and he says, Gampopa indicated the mechanism of how spiritual mentors as oarsmen may move disciples along the spiritual path. He explained that Buddha nature is the cause, and a healthy relationship with a spiritual mentor is the condition for reaching enlightenment. Buddha nature refers to the network of innate qualities and aspects of each individual that allows him or her to become a Buddha. Inspiration from a spiritual mentor acts as the condition for activating this network. According to Maitreya's Sublime Continuum, Buddha nature is a network of the three kinds of factors. Abiding factors, such as the nature of the mind, constitute the first category. They never change. So this is the emptiness of the mind. Evolving factors, the second kind, grow like seeds with proper conditions. They include the mind's innate systems of good qualities, positive potentials, and deep awareness. So this is also related to the work we do with developing compassion, kindness, etc. And three, the aspect of everyone's heart and mind that allows him or her to be inspired is the third type of factor. Inspiration stimulates the realization of abiding factors and activation of evolving ones. In the magnifying glass analogy, then, Buddha nature would refer to the kindling and to the fact that it can catch on fire. A mentor's inspiration would be like the condition needed for the kindling to burst into flames. The result, however, would not be the disciples' emulation, but their transformation to a more enhanced states. Okay, so this is just the general premise, and we're going to flesh it out and come back to it. But if you can do this reading on your own during the break, we're going to skip over to page 49. So the main idea in this topic is that even if you don't meet the teacher one-on-one necessarily, the fact that they're a live, real person, the fact that they teach techniques and embody the same techniques that they teach is a vital component to progress. Otherwise, whatever you're engaged with becomes more like a hobby. It becomes less direct. It has a lot less power. So, I think like a lot of us, my first opening to Buddhism was just the idea of the Dalai Lama, right? I knew very little about him. When I was a little kid, all I knew was that the Dalai Lama didn't kill anything, not even mosquitoes, and that he lost his whole country, but he wasn't angry. Those are the only two things I knew about him when I was little, and then growing up and then becoming a teenager. That was really all I knew. And that alone was enough to be inspirational for me and to become like the guiding light in my life. Just the idea that there was this person out there who was so oriented with non-harmfulness, that his whole way of being was not to retaliate, that struck me as profound. And it still strikes me as profound. But that alone was enough to kind of move something forward. And I think for a lot of us, it can be. Just knowing that was like, wow, that's a different way of living in the world than what we're surrounded with. Now, of course, I knew about Gandhi and I knew about Martin Luther King, but they had already died. The Dalai Lama was still alive. He was still someone that could be interviewed on the news. He was still putting out books and still is. And something about that created a vividness. Yeah, it created a vividness to the type of inspiration, even though I didn't meet him until years and years later. And when I do meet him, it's like 1 or 2 word sentences. It's not like I've had big, deep and meaningful conversations with him about my practice. It's not like I get to have a whole heart-to-heart with him about my path when I'm in person, but I have a heart-to-heart with him about my path, not in person, all the time. It's like a conversation in my head all the time with him and with my other teachers as well. And it's a big difference than just reading a book from 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and not knowing anyone who practices it. Do you know what I mean? It wakes up something just to know that someone like this exists. And so this is the beginnings of the guru-disciple relationship because it is someone who fits the criteria of a suitable guru. So this is where we get into on page 49. This is from the Lam Rim Chen Mo, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment by Lama Tsong Khapa, which is one of the main texts that we use in our tradition. And the reason why we use it is that Lama Tsong Khapa himself became enlightened. And during his lifetime, he was an incredible scholar and an incredible practitioner. He noticed that the Buddha Dharma had gone into some decline, that there'd been some distortions, and there'd been pieces missing when it's traveled to different areas. And so he consciously went all around and gathered the missing pieces of the Dharma from teachers that held it until he could assemble the teachings all back together. And then he put them in order along Atisha's guideline. And then we have the teachings going in sequence. Yeah, so it's an incredibly beautiful and elegant text, the Lam Rim Chen Mo, and he draws quotes and logics from a number of other great scholars and Buddhas. So it's a very important seminal text in our tradition. But what he's talking about in this section is what are the criteria for a qualified guru? Because when the Buddha himself was dying, his students, of course, said, "What will we do when you die?" And the Buddha said, "I will continue to manifest and guide you through teachers with these set of qualities." Yeah, if you meet someone with these set of qualities, then I will operate through them. I am present within them. Yeah, and you'll be able to access the teachings via that relationship. Okay, so it's an interesting premise. We'll unpack it a little bit as time goes by, but that's the general premise, is that if you want to talk to the Buddha, you need a guru with these qualities. And so we'll just start looking at it. Here's the section. It says how to lead students with the actual instructions, how to rely on the teacher, the root of the path, a somewhat elaborate explanation for developing certain knowledge, the defining characteristics of the teacher to be relied upon. So that's where we are, okay, in the text. And where it says how to rely on the teacher, the root of the path, this comes at the very beginning. Guru-disciple relationship for someone who is already Buddhist is sort of like the beginning of the path. For people that were not raised Buddhist, it comes way later. You kind of need to explore the whole thing and come back around and have a guru. Yeah, you go through all the stages, you look at karma, you look at ethics, you look at death and impermanence, and you look at bodhicitta and the six perfections and emptiness, and you go through all this whole thing and think, yeah, that's all very useful and interesting. I think I need a teacher. So it's kind of a different approach that we have if we were raised Buddhist, if we were heritage Buddhists, or if we were not raised Buddhist. And some of that is actually quite functional because despite it being the core of practice and the entryway to practice, guru devotion is incredibly triggering and confronting, right? The whole concept of guru devotion can make you really recoil, like, oh, it seems like a terrible idea. What are you talking about? Why would you ever put so much trust in another human being? That just seems like a recipe for disaster. Have you never seen a documentary about a cult? Have you never heard about this or this or this, right? So these kind of ideas come to us kind of worldly people when we meet the idea of guru devotion. And so don't let go of that kind of skepticism. Keep that skepticism because it will prevent trouble later. But we don't want to let that skepticism turn into a cynicism. Yeah, that just because it's new and it seems fraught and it seems dangerous doesn't mean it doesn't serve a very profound function if approached the right way. But I find that what we do as Dharma students, even if we're not Buddhist, right? Even if we're never going to be Buddhist, what we do as Dharma students is that we either are completely skeptical and cynical and question everything in a little bit of an aggressive way, trying to prove it wrong, or we're just ready to believe everything and we want to be told what to do. And we kind of go back and forth between, I'm the boss, I'm in charge of my life, I'll take what you say or leave it, it's my choice, and anyway, I probably know best anyway, humph. Or, I know nothing, you're amazing, tell me everything, let me merge with you, solve my life, tell me what to do, give me advice. Yeah, this is kind of what we do. So there might be some parallels to transference, right? Maybe. But I think that in the guru-disciple relationship, there's a lot of things that you would see play out in the world with many number of relationships, with marriages, with parent-child relationships, with client-analyst relationships, all of these, dynamics you see happen in a guru-disciple relationship. But then there's something else that happens that is more profound. So there's all of that mess. And when you actually have a teacher, you kind of go through all of that mess. You project all your, partner issues, and then you project all your parent issues, and then you project all of this kind of stuff on them. And then eventually they just keep holding steady with their ethics. And eventually you settle down and realize what the story actually is. Yeah, you settle down and you start to realize that the whole time the guru was not going to hold your hand. And they were not going to do it for you, and they never said that they would. Yeah, and if you want to give them all of the power for your life, they're not going to take it. They don't want it. And what's different than, in different kinds of therapy is the guru probably does not care about the details of your life. They might not ever know what you do for a living. They might not ever know if you're married or not. They might not know if you have kids, etc., etc. They don't really care. That's kind of like not the point. If you must talk about those things, they'll kind of relent and be like, yeah, okay. But it's a little bit like, they've heard it all before. It's same as it ever was. This is samsara we're talking about. There's nothing new under the sun. The guru-disciple relationship is about directly confronting your negative states of minds and habits, not necessarily where they came from. Yeah, not necessarily where they came from. So this is it's a mature relationship at its best, where you've kind of moved through, all the traumas and difficulties of your life to a certain degree that you can manage them with the structures you have that are worldly. And then you bring the Dharma and you kind of let go of all of that extra baggage and say, how about I just look at the root of the issue, innate grasping at the self? How about I look at the root of the issue and its symptoms, not the bad conversation I had today, but the fact that I get irritable, which leads to the bad conversation, which leads to the conflict, et cetera, et cetera. So, most teachers, if you say to them, what should I do about my mother? What I said in class, apply that to your specific situation. What I said in class, apply it to your specific situation. They're not going to spoon feed you the specifics of say this, do that, what's the context, how are they motivated, how are you motivated? It kind of cuts straight through. So there are pros and cons to that approach. Yeah, there are pros and cons to that approach, but at its essence, you are in charge of your own health. You are in charge of your own ability to recognize wisdom. And this person who you label as the Guru Buddha, this person is not saving you. They're teaching you how to heal yourself. So this is the way we want to look at it, but it's confusing because if you see a traditional Buddhist setup in a traditional Buddhist temple, the behaviors of devotion are very off-putting. There's a lot of bowing and prostrating and, flowery titles, like His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, or His Eminence, Chirin Rinpoche, or the Seventh Ling Rinpoche. There's these big flowery titles and there's these postures of devotion and there's all these offerings, and none of that is actually for the guru. It is all for your own mind because you become receptive to what you respect. You become receptive to what you respect. And so if you do the postures of respect and the words of respect, it triggers your mind into a mind of respect, which makes you open and receptive to what you already want to absorb. Does that make sense? So don't be put off by these kind of postures and bowing. Of course, there are lots of practitioners who are thinking, Buddha save me, Guru save me, Guru save me. But that is not what the Buddha taught. That's just human nature wanting to give up responsibility because life is hard. Do you know what I mean? So don't let it throw you, Don't let it throw you. So the qualities, under the little mini outline, it says, generally, in the scriptures and commentaries, many defining characteristics of the teacher are taught from the viewpoint of the individual vehicles, meaning the foundational vehicle or the great vehicle, etc., the tantra vehicle, etc. However, the following is a description of a teacher who instructs you on the stages of the path of the three persons of different capacities and guides you to the Mahayana, which is the path to Buddhahood. So this is referring to a Mahayana guru, but not necessarily a Tantra Mahayana guru. That's another category and that's another level of relationship. So in this case, they're talking about the three persons of different capacities, meaning the small scope, middle scope, great scope, people that are motivated towards future lives, people that are motivated towards nirvana, people that are motivated towards complete enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Remember that three scopes. So it's a teacher that leads you through the three scopes with the aim of getting you to be a Mahayana practitioner. And with respect to this, Maitreya says in his ornament for the Mahayana Sutras, remembering that Maitreya via Asanga is where all of these teachings on Buddha nature that we were talking about come from, right? The guy in the cave that, that story, okay? So he says, rely on a Mahayana teacher who is disciplined, serene, thoroughly pacified, has good qualities surpassing those of the students, is energetic, has a wealth of scriptural knowledge, possesses loving concern, has thorough knowledge of reality, and skill in instructing his disciples, and has abandoned dispiritedness. Thus Maitreya says that a student must rely on a teacher who has these 10 qualities. It is said that those who have not disciplined themselves have no basis for disciplining others. Common sense, right? Therefore, gurus who intend to discipline others' minds must first have disciplined their own. How should they have been disciplined? It is not helpful for them to have done just any practice and then have the result designated as a good quality of knowledge. They need a way to discipline the mind that accords with the general teachings of the conqueror. The 3 precious trainings are definitely such a way. Therefore, Maitreya indicated them with these 3 terms: disciplined, serened, and thoroughly pacified. With respect to what Maitreya said, disciplined refers to the training in ethical discipline. The Sutra on the Vows of Liberation states, "These vows of individual liberation are the bridles set with sharp nails. With constant effort they are fit to the difficult to rein horse of the straying mind." So immediately I think of my mother, who would take issue with training horses in this way. But there are gentler ways to train horses. But what we're talking about here is that there is no sense relying on someone without ethics. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter if they have superior knowledge to you, if they're an amazing scholar. It doesn't matter if they're charismatic. Don't rely on them. Doesn't mean you can't go to classes with them. That's a whole different thing, right? There are some teachers I know that have absolutely rubbish ethics that I have so many issues with, and I would like to confront them directly at the next opportunity. And yet they have studied a lot more than me, and they know a lot more about certain things than me. So I might go to one of their classes and just listen. Yeah, and be like, oh, okay, that's where that came from. Oh, thanks for that. Take some notes. But I'm not relying on them as a teacher. It's a completely different thing. Do you know what I mean? So ethics are very hard to be certain of, because it's not like you're with someone all day, every day, and can like check. You know, you don't know if they're embezzling money. You don't know if they're cheating on their wife. You don't know what they're getting up to, right? So how do you know if someone is ethical? What are the things you look for? Just your common sense. Or what helps you have an educated guess that someone is ethical?
I guess, I don't know if my internet is good enough, but I guess it's just listening and seeing if they're putting themselves before the other or the opposite. Like a general feeling, who is their main focus.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can notice that pretty easily, actually, if they're talking about something. Have they made it all about them, or are they making it about sharing for you? Yeah, absolutely. Do they enjoy their authority a little too much? Always a warning sign, right? Things like that. Yeah, how do you know? I mean, how do you know if you're being ethical? That's another question, you know? If you look at the 10 non-virtues and the 10 virtues, you know, refraining from harm physically, verbally, mentally, do you have to be perfect to be considered ethical? Or is it an orientation? Is it a transparency? You know, these are really important things for us, because we are looking after people even though we are not gurus, right? But we are looking after people, and people are putting their trust in us. And yet I'm sure we're all full of hypocrisy and inconsistency and flaws. And if you think you have to be perfect in order for people to find you trustworthy, you can either become very defensive and I don't know, dishonest about protecting your hypocrisy, or you can become excessively transparent and tell people your faults excessively at the wrong times in the wrong ways in order to be forgiven. A little bit like if you've ever read Albert Camus' The Fall, he talks about the judge penitent. And basically, you know, in this character in this book, The Fall, he goes around basically telling everyone all of his faults, because then they can't judge him. Right? It's like a preemptive strike. If I tell you everything, all of my secrets, all of my worst things, then maybe I'm absolved of guilt. So we go to these two ways if we haven't kind of made peace with the fact that we value ethics, but we are inconsistent. Yeah, so I think, you know, when you're looking at this group conversation, look at yourself a little bit and your own relationship to ethics, because there are the ethics you value and do absolutely all the time. There are core values that have completely integrated. And then there are the ethics that you're working on. You know, maybe you're trying to work on not having divisive speech, for example. But you know that you're imperfect and sometimes you do have divisive speech, especially talking about politics, etc. Right? And you know you're working on it, and then you're in a little bit of, you know, dissonance with yourself. And then you come to someone who says, "Tell me the way, show me the way." And you're like, "Yeah, I don't know." Right? Or, "I do know, but I'm not perfect. Can I say?" So I think a really deep self-knowledge about your own relationship with ethics helps you see the ethics of the guru or the potential guru. And it's said that someone that you actually take on in this deep relationship, you should really wait before making that choice. They say wait, you know, even 12 years from when you first meet and are inspired by someone to when you actually make this deep relationship. What actually happens is that people usually don't wait more than 12 hours, right? Let alone 12 years. 12 years is solid. And for one of my teachers, I did wait 12 years. And part of me wishes I would have just jumped on board sooner. But that 12 years of watching and waiting means that now that we are in that connection, it's very solid. Because I could test him and poke him and prod him and ask him all sorts of things without worrying that I was being a bad student, because I wasn't his student yet. Yeah. Now that I am his student, the relationship can change, but it was built on years of observation and trust and mutual checking. So it's an interesting thing to explore, that despite the fact that all of the traditional teachings say, look for this criteria, check, wait, very few people do. Yeah, very few people do. People are in a hurry to give up responsibility. Yeah, and even very intelligent people can be swept up by charisma very easily, or by a big name or reputation very easily. And the thing is that it doesn't always end badly, and so it's a hard habit to get out of. You know, I talk with my fellow long-term Buddhists about this a lot of, gee, if we knew then what we knew now, we would have really waited on this and this and this and this. And yet it turned out okay 90% of the time. It's just that little 10%, that little 10% of the time has caused a lot of trouble. Yeah. So it's interesting because there's also the ethics that you project. So say they don't have good ethics, but you assume that they do, and you respond to them as if they do, and nothing ever challenges that. You never find out about their gaps in ethics. Can you have the same power in the dynamic? Can there be the same transformation in the dynamic? From the Buddhist perspective, we would say yes. If you think that they have ethics and you never find out otherwise, that's as good as if they actually had those ethics. But gee, that's dangerous, isn't it? Because you could build this whole practice on the basis of this one personification of the path, and then maybe they die and you find out they have, 10 wives and, bodies buried in the backyard or something. It's going to really rattle your practice. Do you know what I mean?
But
yeah.
Maybe if we assume that someone is ethic, he will begin to be ethic through this process, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Like an individual transformation, yes.
Exactly. And so that can work out, right? And it does work out a lot of the time. And, it's just, the question becomes, if your practice becomes strong enough, then if you see inconsistency and you see breaches in ethics, it's not enough to throw you, right? Then it's not enough to interrupt you from your path, because you've learned enough because of that dynamic to have touched the essence of guru, divorced from the personality of this person. So even if they turn out to be a complete charlatan, the learning is yours, you own it. And it was related to your interactions with them. But then now they've shown their true colors, you need to separate from them. You still are holding the relationship with this high respect, while at the same time saying, and I'm just going to move away. Which is what a lot of our, FPMT family had to do with New Kadampa tradition, Geshe, which is the Buddhist cult, right? You guys know there's a Buddhist cult, the New Kadampa tradition, stay away, bless their hearts. Their Geshe that started this was an FPMT Geshe. He belonged to our organization. And then he started to do this very destructive practice. He started kind of, I don't know, creating his own vows for things. He was kind of, getting weird about money. And then there's rumors about kind of ties to China, and it got really creepy and weird. And, he split off from the organization and created his own organization that actively tries to undermine the Dalai Lama. So New Kadampa tradition, they have a lot of flaws. And yet there's a lot of people in FPMT who had that Geshe as their teacher and didn't know how bizarre things were going to get. And he's a very clear teacher who's very well educated and very charismatic. So there's this interesting dance that these students have to do where they say, these appearances of negative behavior are a lesson for me of what not to do, of what not to do. And I need to just kind of hold what I learned from him in respect while separating myself from an appearance that seems destructive. And I might even need to call him out on those things and say, it's not healthy what you're doing, other people shouldn't join you, and at the same time, thank you for all you taught me. So it's complicated, right? It can be really complicated, and it can feel, like cognitive dissonance. Yeah, you can get into a real kind of fracturing. And then if you can just come back to, in emptiness, everything is one taste. In emptiness, everything is one taste. Nothing is positive or negative in and of itself from its own side. Nothing exists independent of context, sure, but also nothing is ultimately one thing or another. And yet ethics are vital. And yet karma and cause and effect are completely operating in the relative world. So to hold emptiness and ethics and a knowledge of karma, this is our work for our whole life, is to hold these two in perfect balance and to realize that they're complementary concepts, not contradictory. But when we're having these kind of, moments of truth, you can start to feel fractured and confused about what is right and wrong and what you should do with that information. Does that make sense? So prior to the guru-disciple relationship being formed, there's a lot more room for choice, and there's a lot more room for checking. And the first thing you check is ethics. The first thing you check is ethics. Now, if it's a Buddhist teacher, nowadays you could Google him, right? And if there's a terrible scandal, it'll probably show up. It doesn't mean it's true and you should still investigate, but it should give you a little warning light that goes, let's just check. Let's just check. So you can Google them. And then when you're in front of them, keep a heart open, ready to be inspired, while at the same time skeptical, watching, common sense. You kind of keep those two things going. Heart open, ready to be inspired and connect, while at the same time checking to make sure you're not just getting swept up in the crowd and the energy of the moment and the fact that the Dharma is amazing, regardless who is teaching it. Yeah. So ethics, it continues on also in the exegesis of discipline. This is the bridle for undisciplined disciples. Ethics are the bridle for undisciplined disciples. So over the page it says, as is implied above, the senses pursue improper objects and like wild horses lead you to engage in unsuitable actions. Just as a trainer tames a wild horse with a good bridle, so too teachers learn discipline to control their senses and to turn towards suitable actions with great effort. Hence, teachers have disciplined their minds, which are like wild horses. Yeah. So I think this is clear, right? No questions? More questions? Yeah, if the person you're considering to be your teacher has huge mood swings, not a good sign, right? They can be your friend, they can teach you stuff, but probably are not guru material, right? If they have huge mood swings. Okay, serene refers to having accomplished the training of meditative concentration. Meditative concentration is a mental state in which the mind remains peacefully withdrawn. This is achieved by means of reliance on mindfulness and vigilance in your ethical discipline, turning away from wrongdoing and engaging in good activities. Thoroughly pacified refers to having accomplished the training of wisdom. This is done by specifically analyzing the meaning reality and dependence on meditative serenity, wherein the mind becomes serviceable. So this serene and thoroughly pacified, relates to concentration and wisdom, which again are, you can't check 100%, but by watching you can get a sense of it. Are they someone that loses their thread, loses their train of thought really easily? Or are they going off on tangents in order to bring nuance to the initial topic? One of my teachers is able to go on a tangent for like an hour and a half and still bring it back to the main topic he was talking about. And so you think he's lost his thread, but actually he was giving all of this nuance to bring it back home to the central topic. So concentration is something to look for. And, thorough training in wisdom, thoroughly pacified, do they have a realization of emptiness? You cannot check, right? You cannot know for sure, but you can assume based on their behavior. Yeah, if they have a behavior that seems to very easily buy into their own projections and believe the surface story of things, they probably haven't realized emptiness. Now, if it's a direct perceptual realization of emptiness, that's something very significant and profound. In this context, at least an understanding of emptiness, right? A correct understanding is enough. A correct intellectual understanding of emptiness that they have conviction in, that's not just intellectual, but perhaps correct assumption, if you're remembering the 7 types of awareness, if they have correct assumption about emptiness. Okay. So, however, to have only the good qualities of knowledge that come from disciplining the mind with the 3 trainings is not sufficient, the 3 trainings being ethics, concentration, and wisdom. Teachers must also have the good qualities of scriptural learning. Therefore, wealth of scriptural knowledge refers to being erudite concerning the 3 scriptural collections and the like. Geshe Trungpa said that when the gurus of the Mahayana give an explanation, they must cause their students to have a deep understanding. When they are putting the teachings into practice, they must demonstrate what is helpful at the time when the teaching is on the wane and what is useful at the situation at hand. So this is something very Gelugpa, okay? Gelugpa, our tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. Some of the other traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, like the Nyingma and the Kagyu and the Sakya, they might not have the same emphasis on needing to have scriptural knowledge, but they still have it, even if it's quieter. So our tradition very much emphasizes scholastic knowledge, just raw intellectual knowledge, solid logic. We really emphasize it in our tradition because it acts as the basis to then practice in a way that's going to be unmistaken. You're not going to make as many mistakes in your meditation practice if you know what to watch out for before you even start. So a wealth of scriptural knowledge also means that just because you're a good practitioner doesn't necessarily mean you're a good teacher. Yeah? To be a good teacher, you need to know your stuff. To be a good practitioner, you don't need to know all the lists, right? You just need to know that they exist and what kind of the essence is. Right? To be a good practitioner, you need to understand the basis of ethics is non-harmfulness. Hopefully remember the 10 non-virtues, but you don't have to remember all the lists, right? To understand the mind, you need to understand that there are main minds and there are mental factors. You need to understand the 7 types of awareness basically mean you go from coarse to subtle, from confused to wise. That's enough to be a good practitioner. So you go to these and you learn there's 51 mental factors. The teacher needs to know the 51 mental factors, don't they? But the student doesn't have to know all of them specifically in their correct order in order to be a good practitioner, right? But the teacher does need to know their stuff. And so, there's a bit of a problem with teachers who teach in the West, because if they know just a little bit more than their students, it's easy to make it look like they're very wise. Or if they've learned things all from books and not necessarily from the correct sources in the correct way, they can rattle off things without really understanding. So it's something to kind of watch out for, especially sadly with Western teachers. Tibetan Geshis might not have any realizations, but definitely they're educated. If you see the word Geshe, you know that it means educated. Doesn't necessarily mean wise, but you know, with that amount of education, often a lot of wisdom comes with it. So Geshe equals educated. Yeah. Does it make sense? Yeah. Wealth of scriptural knowledge. Okay, so the knowledge of reality is again related to wisdom. The knowledge of selflessness of phenomena. In another way, it is said to be best if the teachers have perception of reality, but if they do not have it, it is acceptable for them to know reality through scripture and reasoning, as I said before. So although teachers are endowed with these good qualities of scriptural learning and knowledge, it is not enough for them to have good qualities that are equal to or lower than those of their students. Instead, they need qualities that surpass those of their students. Verses about friends says, people degenerate by relying on those inferior to themselves. By relying on equals, they stay the same. By relying on those superior, they attain excellence. Thus rely on those who are superior to yourself. If you rely on whomever is superior, thoroughly pacified, and endowed with ethical wisdom and exceeding wisdom, you will become superior even to those who are superior. So what is said is that basically you can stand on the shoulders of your teachers and even achieve higher heights and realizations than them. But in the beginning, they need to know more than you and they need to be able to do more than you in their practice. There needs to be a superiority there. So it's a hard thing to quantify. It's a hard thing to quantify. But again, remember, we're talking about having made the decision to lock in the relationship. When it's peers teaching peers, there doesn't have to be so much of this analysis. But you know, often people rush to call someone their teacher without realizing what that really means. You know, so you can say the person who teaches me this topic, sure, but the person who is my teacher, that is a relationship that is built on a lot of time and trust and mutual checking and observation, and is not to be kind of said lightly. Because this person is then going to become the representative of the Buddha for you. So it's different than a mentor, okay? A mentor might have superior qualities to you and you rely on them and learn many things from them. But they also might have all sorts of human flaws that don't interrupt your ability to get their wisdom about a certain topic. Do you know what I mean? Right, so you know, you could have a, I don't know, a supervisor of some kind who obviously knows more about psychoanalysis than you, obviously he has walked through the stages with patients a lot more than you, and you can learn so much from them, but and at the same time, they could have their marriage be falling apart and their kids be drug addicts and all sorts of other things in their personal life that are incongruent with what they're teaching you. And yet what they're teaching you is still really useful and beneficial. And you can kind of separate them out a little bit in this sort of mentorship. Although it might, you know, trouble you a little bit, still you can find the wisdom, right, in what they're saying. In the guru-disciple relationship, you need to see everything they do as a teaching, including the way they manifest in their personal life. That's really interesting, right? So there's what they say in class, which is nice, perfect, pure Dharma, easy to take on board in terms of believing it, not necessarily doing it. But then, okay, say then at the end of class, I don't know, they go straight to the bar and have 5 beers. If you've chosen them to be your guru, you have to see that behavior as a teaching for you, not as a human failing that is just something unfortunate. Do you see how it's a different sort of thing? So you're trying to see the whole, this holistic view of everything they're doing as teaching you specifically, which is why you want to wait before you make this relationship solid and formal. Yeah, because the power of it once you do so is huge. The power of once you make this relationship is so much bigger than any other relationship in your life. You're basically saying, this person is valuing my path above all else. And so everything they do is trying to transmit things that will wake me up. Yeah. And so adopting this attitude is incredibly powerful, because then you're never out of class, even if you're going out for coffee. Yeah. So what do you think about this? It's completely fine to argue or to add. Can you see benefits? Can you see disadvantages?
I think it makes me feel that perhaps sometimes we choose too lightly our therapists.
Yeah, never mind the spiritual teacher, just like, who are we getting therapy from? Yeah. We should really choose our massage therapists better, and our acupuncturists as well. Our mechanics. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because like, we're reasonable people, aren't we? And yet then we have this kind of childlike trust sometimes, and then this like teenage disillusionment sometimes. And neither of them are very functional ways of engaging with someone with, quote, superior wisdom and integrating it into your own. But this is kind of how we react. We either go into, daddy, take me home and feed me, or you're not the boss of me, I'll do what I like, hair toss, right? I kind of go back and forth between these two things. And neither of them are functional or what is being taught. Yeah. But they're natural kind of responses to this dynamic. These 6 qualities, being disciplined, serene, and thoroughly pacified, having good qualities that surpass those of the students, the wealth of knowledge from studying many scriptures, and thorough knowledge of reality, are the good qualities obtained for oneself, the teacher. The remaining qualities, being energetic, having skill in instruction, possessing loving concern, and abandoning dispiritedness, are the good qualities for looking after others. So does that make sense? There's certain qualities the teacher needs for their own sake in order to be a developed practitioner. And then there are these additional things that make them not just a practitioner, but someone who is now engaging in being a teacher. So energetic, having skill in instruction, possessing loving concern, and abandoning dispiritedness. These are pretty easy to check if you're, in front of someone for a few classes, few weeks, few months, to just kind of notice that. I think about my own teacher, particularly with abandoning dispiritedness and being energetic, because the number of times he has taught the same thing, and yet it sounds fresh every time. It's so impressive to me that he can be like, all right, let's start from the beginning. And it doesn't have the kind of like inner eye roll of, I've been teaching you guys this for 20 years. Why don't you remember? He doesn't have that. It's really beautiful to see. And you see that with the Dalai Lama as well, where he might give the same public talk 3 times in the same day to 3 different groups. And I've been with him during these teaching tours sometimes, and 3 different groups. He's giving the same basic talk, but it sounds completely fresh and energized and new and vivid to this moment, and yet still have the same content as the talk before. So this is a quality that you can really quite easily check and look for, is do they seem energetic about teaching the Dharma? Do they have a real love for their students? When it's getting tough and they're not remembering, or they're misbehaving, or they're getting distracted, do they keep their patience and not get dispiritedness? Yeah, so these things will take a while to develop for all of us. Further it says, and I think this is a verse to highlight, Sages do not wash away sins with water. They do not clear away being suffering with their hands. They do not transfer their own knowledge to others. They liberate by teaching the truth of reality. So that's the pith of the whole thing there. And we'll keep going after Passover, but if you can read that little short section by Alexander Berzin, it'll help the conversation. And just kind of really sit with, what do you understand by this so far, this whole dynamic, and how is it the same as what you already know, and how is it different? And are there some benefits you can take from that whole thing? So we'll just sit for a second and let everything sink in. Pull whatever wisdom we've touched into the rest of the day. Okay, thanks guys.